Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the fifth chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. The fifth chapter, we're going to review the fourth. These are the words of Solomon, who is a king of Israel as well as a sage. Then I looked again at all the oppression that is done under the sun, and see, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter, and power on the side of their oppressor, but they have no comforter. Solomon is writing as an observer rather than a victim of oppression. He was a king, he was on the top, and even though he did administer justice justly, the fact is that the absolute monarch's control was not so complete of his kingdom as to prevent injustice at every level. So even though from the top up there were plenty of people in the middle and at the bottom who were oppressing people, but he also notices that power is on the side of the oppressor. With power comes the potential to oppress and the temptation, and that is just a fact of life. It's true in his age, it's true in our age, it's true in any age. Then he honestly thinks that death is to be better than life, and a stillborn to be a preferable alternative to even being born and died in the next two verses. Then the fourth, fifth, and sixth are a fluctuation between extremes, and then it finds a balance in the middle. And I saw that all the toil and skill of the work brings envy between man and his neighbor. That too is futile and feeding on wind. The word saw, Solomon is once more writing as an observer, so he's witnessing that all the hard work and all the skill in the world, the economy is actually motivated by envy, one of the seven deadly sins, the keeping up with the Joneses, the constant desire to one-upsmanship, and just envy is sinful, but it also deprives people of enjoying life because they are so caught up in working to outdo their neighbors. So this is another species of vanity or futility. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. This is the opposite extreme. The workaholic degenerates into the idler, the lazy man who Solomon nary has a kind word for at all. And the fool's path is self-destructive. Their laziness invites their own ruin. So that the one who, these are two opposites yet equally extreme approaches to living life. Better is a hand filled with rest than both hands filled with toil and feeding on wind. The superior alternative to either extreme is to have a balance of rest and enjoyment and work. Without work, life wouldn't be life at all. Work, but and if we spent every waking hour in pleasure or hedonism, that is just not a realistic scenario. So work is necessary, but rest and balance are appropriate as well. Then he says in the ninth verse, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. This is one of the mathematical equation that I like to explain it as is 1 + 1 = 3. There is strength in number, and two, if whether you fall on the road, you have a companion to pick him up, whether you need to lay down with someone somewhere at night. Two, the body cannot generate its own heat. It requires the contact with another body, and there's a lot of arithmetic in the 9th through 12th verse. The numbers 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, threefold chord. That's how it closes. Threefold chord is going to be stronger than a twofold, obviously, self-evidently. Then he describes a hypothetical scenario of a person who was of obscure origins who rose from prison to the palace. He became king. He had everything against him, yet only his wisdom enabled him to emerge on the throne. For he comes out of prison to be king, although in his reign he was born poor. Solomon was the inheritor of a throne, but this king that he describes was something that didn't quite live to be a dynasty, because as the story progresses, we learn that another ambitious, unscrupulous man, perhaps from equally humble or degraded origins, eventually eclipses him and outplaces him. And this too is futile and feeding on the wind. So there is a return to the theme which predominates in the first two chapters more so than the third chapter. That word appears, I think, only once or twice in the third, but certainly it's all over the place, and there are 35 appearances of that word in the book itself. First verse, 5th chapter, lesson itself. Guard your steps when you go to the house of Elohim, and draw near to listen rather than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they do evil. The house of Elohim would have been the temple which he built. This was his life's meaning and life's purpose, and he got it done at the age 30. When he was 19 years old, he asked for the wisdom in order to complete the task, and by age 30, he was able to do it because the construction began in the 4th year of his reign, and it lasted 7 years, and he inherited the throne when he was 19 years old, and this would have been adjacent property to him. So once more, Solomon is writing as an observer, and he would have had intimate access from the proximity of exposure because his palace and the temple, his house and God's house, were adjacent physically, and he observes a lot of erroneous approaches to approaching God. God is not a distant dictatorial deity. He wants to be known. He wants us to know him, but we have to approach him on his terms. So circumspection is necessary. We cannot approach God as casually as a friend. He is our friend, yes, but we are not his equal, and therefore we must approach ourselves with care and caution, and you don't want to fall into the trap of fools who think they are doing good, sacrificing in fools. The existence of sacrifice is necessitated by sin, so if you are constantly sacrificing and you think that you are forgiven, you are missing the point. You are not repenting, and repenting is the way that we are forgiven. Fools cannot know this. They cannot understand it. They will not know it. Do not be hasty with your mouth, and let not your heart hurry to bring forth the word before Elohim, for Elohim is in the heavens, and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few. The advice of James 1:17 being slow to speak and quick to hear are paralleled in here. Want to think about what we say, and we'd rather listen, because in the first verse, draw near to listen. So approaching God's presence, if we are the ones talking, then we are not going to make the most of that experience there. God's presence demands that we listen to it and learn from it. So we have to be use an economy of words. Matthew 6:8 comes to or Matthew 6:7 rather. The Gentiles who do foolish babbling and vain repetitions. That word vanity has a New Testament parallel. But God is not impressed with eloquence of speech or superfluity of words, when an economy of words will do. Now, as the composer of the book of Proverbs represents the economy of language with Solomon, the simplicity of sentence structure, yet within that simplicity, the profundity of wisdom. If the ability, now wisdom is more easily expressed in elaborate verbiage, so it could be argued that the ability to express profound truths in simple statements is what separates the wise among the wise from the merely wise, and Solomon was certainly the wisest of all men, Jesus Christ excepted. For a dream comes through the greatness of the task, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. Dreams, now he speaks somewhat disparagingly of dreams, even though he himself was visited by Elohim in a dream twice, in the 3rd chapter of Kings and in the 9th chapter, and then finally in the 11th. But most people shouldn't put too much stock in dreams, because they're misleading, they're illusory, they're empty air, they are near in the physical structure of the word, which translates as vanity, which is hebel, which refers to mist or vapor. So dreams have the same illusory quality and shape and characteristic. But the fool just can't help themselves. They are self-advertising. Fools are self-advertising by nature, and a prudent man concealeth knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaimeth foolishness. Fools cannot help it. Proverbs 12:23. Foolishness is self-advertising, self-aggrandizing by its nature, whereas the wise is content to be quiet and remain for what it is. Fools are governed, they are impetuous creatures governed by impulse, who just have the compulsion to known and be heard, even though they don't have a whole lot to say. In the words of Plato, to paraphrase him, a wise man speaks because he has something to say. A fool speaks because he has to say something. When you make a vow to Elohim, do not delay to pay it, for he takes no pleasure in fools. Pay that which you have vowed. A vow is a very serious matter, and this is something we have to be even more cautious about entering into than when we approach God in the church or the temple or in our prayers. The house of Elohim is in your hearts as well. We are the living temples in the New Testament. But more to the point of the passage, a vow is a binding oath, the violation of which you invite curses and consequences and often death by your own violation to them. So, you don't want to be rash in the vow. You have to get, if you vow, if you vow something to Elohim, you owe him that, and you have to pay it and satisfy it. And God does not suffer fools gladly. So those who treat trivially the act of entering into a vow, which is a very significant matter, do not know what they are getting into. But pay up and get it over with, done and quick. It is better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Don't let your mouth cash a check that your body cannot write a check that your body cannot cash. You do not want to let your words get you into trouble. So when you take a vow, you are signing up for complete faithfulness. This is a vow. Now, there were Nazirite vows, for instance. A vow is also a promise that we make to God, but we have to remember that we are not saved by our promises to God, but by his promises to us. Do not allow your mouth to cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of Elohim that it was a mistake. Why should Elohim be wroth at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? So once more, the rash impetuous impulse of compulsion to speak can only get one into trouble. Sin is more than mere trouble. It is an egregious violation of the Almighty standards for our righteous conduct. And the Hebrew, they observe no distinction between messenger and angel. That is how that word translates, and because this translation retains much of the Hebrew original, that's why I sort of stuttered over that word. But you don't want to make a mistake. If there is a difference between a sin and a mistake, not every mistake is a sin, but every sin is certainly a mistake. So both those words appear in that sentence. And why should so you don't want to invite your own self-destruction or his intervention, his destructive hands on your enterprises, the work of your toil, the work of your hands. You do not want your own rash impulsive entrance into sinful speaking in the presence of the Almighty. Invite these things into your life. For in much dreaming and many words there is futility, but fear Elohim. No, some good, dreams can be spoken of positively. We have dreams and aspirations and ambitions, but the dreams of which he speaks here, he speaks somewhat more disparagingly of. He does not place a whole lot of stock in dreams, although himself visited by theophonic manifestations 3 times and that are recorded in Scripture. But, just the superfluity of words is comparable to dreaming too much. When a fool talks, they say people who say much often do not say a whole lot. There's the qualitative and the quantitative dichotomy to consider there. But once more, the word futility, so dreaming is another species of futility. Nothing constructive, nothing lasting comes from dreams. They come and go, and they are real only in the subconscious. But the fear of the Almighty, fear Elohim, this is the axiomatic assumption of wisdom literature. It is the foundation of wisdom as expressed in Psalm 11:10, Job 28:28, and Proverbs 9:10, 15:33, and I think knowledge is in 1:7. But he doesn't quite combine those, but he does the conclusion, the author of Ecclesiastes' conclusion, distinct from Solomon. This book was actually written post-exilic period, but the words, the creative genius is unquestionably Solomon. The ancients had more adept oral traditions than do we, because our memories are severely compromised by the technology which reduces our attention spans to that of a goldfish. If you see the oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in a province, do not be astonished at the matter, for a higher than a high is guarding, and there are higher ones over him. He's telling his citizen subjects that as king, he knows that there's oppression in his kingdom, there's injustice, there are all these things, and he was eventually partly responsible for it, even though he did administer justice fairly and wisely and prudently. He ultimately did resort to oppressive taxation, which resulted in the resentment and which culminated in the revolt against his kingdom, but certainly by his son's early reign. But, he's saying, do not be surprised. There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing I can do about it, king, but there is someone above him who is watching him, and there are ones over them, and eventually the higher-ups that he is referring to are not the heavenly hierarchy, but the socio-political one. And the increase of the land is for all. The king himself is served from the field. These were an ancient agricultural people, and the task of feeding a palace was consumed vast amounts of food and vast amounts of sums of money. And testament to Solomon's ingenuity, he supplied much of his trading partner to the north, Hiram, the king of the maritime city-state of Tyre in Phoenicia, the modern country of Lebanon. They had the timbers and the craftsmen and the expertise, and Solomon also had a maritime commercial empire that would not have been possible without the arrangement. But what did the Phoenicians rely on? Israel, and that was food. So their agricultural body, as part of the terms in the arrangement for the provision of the timber and the craftsmen to build the temple, Solomon had to finance the feeding of Hiram's palace. Palaces were massive buildings with more than the king's residence to feed in there, certainly. And the intake of Hiram's palace was 80% of that of Solomon's own, but he arranged it all to happen. He who loves silver is not satisfied with silver, nor he who loves wealth the increase. That too is futile. Solomon had about the healthiest attitude and disposition towards wealth that one could have, considering all the wealth that he had, all the bounty, all the treasure. But, he was not, if the Bible is not God's not against you having things, he's just against things having you. And the Bible says, if riches increase, set not thine heart upon them, Psalm 62:11. But it's all futility. If you love wealth, now, money is a lot of people's gods. They think on it constantly. They sacrifice it. They look to it as the cure to all their solutions, the panacea to all their problems, their source of security and satisfaction. Money is a lot of people's gods, but ye cannot serve God and mammon. Matthew 6:24, Luke 16:13. It's all futile. The love of money is what is sinful. 1 Timothy 6:10. Not money itself. The corrupt human response to money brings out the worst in us. But Solomon is not impressed. He's had all the silver in the world, and in fact, gold was so plentiful during the reign of his kingdom. The triannual influx was some 666 talents, and archaeological evidence suggests that these amounts were not exaggerated. And so abundant was gold during his kingdom that silver was accounted for not. But silver is still valuable in just about any other place and time. With the increase of goods, there is an increase of those consuming them. What advantage, then, is to their owners but to look on? When you have all the money in the world, everyone wants to be your friend, and everyone will certainly feign friendship for your favor. So, with the accumulation of wealth, it invites leeches into your life, even if the accumulator of that wealth does not invite the leeches and the mooches in. So what good is having all this if you spend it on the enjoyment of others while you are hosting? You have the duties of hosting in your home, and these freeloaders are constantly there. What good, what profit is that? And all you can do is look on and observe. And Solomon has the eye of the observer and the mind of a scientist. He is a man on a mission who conducts an experimental approach and ethos to discovering the meaning of life. That is the ultimate question of Ecclesiastes. What is the meaning of life? wisdom literature is ask-oriented rather than answer-oriented, but there are several questions within that main question. Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the plenty of the rich does not let him sleep. So people who are busy doing grueling manual physical labor, they're going to sleep eat more easily than the one who is at luxury and leisure, but he pursues wealth. He's going to have insomnia because once money becomes your god, the getting and the guarding of it becomes your constant endeavor and constant pursuit, so much so that if carried to a certain extreme, you can deprive yourself of sleeping and therefore functioning as a healthy human being. So infinitely superior to that would be the life of one who performs physically exhaustive labor and for less pay, but he still can sleep soundly at night. That is blessing we are not to take for granted. There is a sickly evil I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner, for this is evil. He spares no adjectives of gruesomeness, sickly evil. This is he describes the deficiency that he addresses as a malignant tumor, a malignant moral cancer, and this is the this is the acquisitiveness and the possessiveness of owner, the one who hoards the wealth and doesn't spend it on society or anything. He just has mountains of money in his vault. No good is coming from him having there. This he considers evil. Solomon certainly utilized his money and he continued to sustain a profit, but he also built extravagant building projects, but ultimately his extravagance proved to be his undoing. Solomon, a man of supernal excellence, was ultimately undone by his excesses. But those riches perish through evil use, and he brings forth a son, and there is not in his hand. So money has wings, it can fly away, you get rich quick. Money is not guaranteed to be permanent, yet people look at it as security, but you can lose it all in the instant of an eye, a twinkle of an eye. How many people were wiped out by the stock market crash of 1929? So riches do have wings, they do not last forever. You are not guaranteed to have what you have at any stage of your life, and much of life consists of preparing to provide for yourself in retirement, but through evil use, that means that he is spending his money on sinful stuff, carnal delights, and then he has a son through the carnality of his lifestyle, and he has nothing to give him. He can't even feed him, he can't even clothe him because of his own sin and his own selfishness. As he came naked from his mother's womb, so he returns to go as he came, and from his labor which he goes into his hand, he takes none whatsoever. This language mimics Job 121, naked I came into the earth, naked I shall return. And so as we enter, so too will we exit this life with nothing we will be naked, and we will not have possessions. All the money we accumulate and acquire, we cannot take it with us. We can take nothing but the skin on our bones. The same way we exit this world is the same way we enter it, with nothing but ourselves. And so the circular nature is indicated by the phrase, to go as he came. And what is the purpose or reason for all this labor? And there is no easy or good answer to that question, because he spent his whole life acquiring wealth and not losing any of it, only to lose his life. The his is plural. And this too is a grievous evil. Exactly as he came, so he goes, and exactly what gain has he since he toiled for the wind? Solomon, in an earlier phase of his life, he must have been on a roller coaster ride of success and just everything else, but Ecclesiastes are his maturest musing, so he is approaching death's door, and he is dominated by the thought of death. This very much influences much of the content of which he reads. But, even though he had profited tremendously mathematically, financially, he considers the profit to be useless. What profit is this? What gain? The word gain has a commercial connotation, and he's toiling for the wind because you can't take anything with you. And in that sense, the wealth that we have is as an elusive as the wind in our ultimate and final destiny, which comes after this life. All his days he also eats in darkness, and with much sorrow and sickness and wrath. So to eat in darkness, darkness is indicative of nothing pleasant. It is, sin, ignorance, and sometimes physical darkness, and the fool walks in darkness. And, this is just a tragic life, dominated and defined by sorrow and grief and sickness and illness and disease and wrath. They invite the anger of God and perhaps others that's what they get for living in darkness, the one who is so dominated by the urge to control all the money in the world. See what I have seen. It is good and pleasant for one to eat and drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun, all the days of the life which Elohim gives him, for it is his portion. So there's somewhat of a contradiction, but the contradiction is only apparent. He says that it is now good to enjoy the fruits of our labor, to toil for what we enjoy, what we are able to enjoy, in ways that we were not if it was just handed to us. The satisfaction of having worked for what you enjoy doubles the satisfaction you can derive from having it. But the reason that the contradiction is only apparent is because this time God is in the picture. Elohim gives him the enjoyment and the work, even the assignments we do are gifts from God. And but he's writing from under the sun, so that earthly heavenly dichotomy. So we live on earth, but God gives us rains on us showers of blessings from the heavens. And this is our portion, this is our inheritance, this is what we are entitled to have, this is our possession. Furthermore, when Elohim has given any man riches and wealth, and permitted him to enjoy them, and to receive his portion, and rejoice in his labor, this is a gift of God. God is the giver of gifts. He gives, the Spirit sovereignly selects a spiritual gift. So I know what my gift is, teaching, what I'm doing right now. You have a gift, whether you know it or not, and the way to answer that or figure it out is to get involved in a church. But more to the point of the passage, even the money that we have, it is a gift from God. Sometimes it disables, it distracts us from the one who has money, and money becomes their God. Then God is out of the picture. They do not regard it as a gift, but something that they earned. So the godless gainer of wealth is God is not at all in his mind. The wicked in his proud countenance seeks no God. God is nowhere on his mind. Psalm 10:4. But the one who has God in the picture is grateful, not merely for the gifts, but the giver. So to delight and satisfy and be thankful for the gifts, but neglect the giver, is tantamount to idolatry. Though it not be much, let him remember the days of his life, because Elohim bears witness by the gladness of his heart. So even a little with God in the picture is he who has little, but God has greater wealth and treasure than he who has much without God. So better to be impoverished and spiritually rich than to be materially wealthy and spiritually bankrupt, have no gifts in heaven, nothing to look forward. And the gladness of his heart, God wants us to be happy, but not take pleasure in moderation. Add work to the midst, and you will have more satisfaction and enjoyment if you work for what you enjoy and you acknowledge God. Acknowledge him in all thy ways, and he shall direct your path. Proverbs 3:6. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.